Alrighty, so for our first discussion, which is where we're going to write some code, we're going to share it with everybody in the class, I've decided we're going to do what we will end up making into an app as we all code it together, a carbon footprint app. Now, the reason we're doing this together is that you're going to, as I previewed in week one, you're going to end up writing some code on your own, and this is going to give you a good basis for what you need to do. So, and this is going to be the topic, is the carbon footprint, how to calculate it. Okay, so let's just go ahead and remember, and this discussion is going to look different than other discussions you may have had, depending on who you've had in the core in Canvas, in that you won't be able to see other students post until you hit reply. Now, the reason I do that is that to really help you code on your own, because it's so easy to just look at somebody else's code and take their code, and that's not, A, you're not going to learn that way, and B, it's just not in good integrity for learning and for being in a class. Because what the reason you want to do this code on your own is when you come into code reviews, which I've talked about a little bit already, you want to know how to code, and this is the way you learn. So just FYI, when you come into this item, right, you won't see replies until you do your reply. Okay, just want to be clear about that. And the idea is not to, if you need help, please reach out. There's tutors. Zach is here. I've probably at this point talked about him already. I'm here during office hours. Please reach out, because this is where you really start to add skill from knowledge that information and hopefully knowledge you've gained. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Before we even start into how to do it, I'm going to walk you through how to modify your public repo for this course inside of our course to render as a website. Okay. Did I write that here? I didn't. Okay, so actually let's go ahead and set up the files, and then because we'll kind of do it, and actually I need to add the link here to show you, or just the verbiage to show you what we're going to do. So let's just actually do it. Okay, so in VS Code, I'm going to get out of here real quick because I was just playing around for a minute. All right, so in VS Code, I now have changed over and I'm opening my public repo, okay, where we had already worked on week 1, W1. So now over here, what we're going to do is create a new folder here. We're going to call this W2. It's kind of funny, W2, I think of that. And now in here, we're going to create a new file. It's not a surprise. Index, explanation, there we go. And then we'll create another file called main.js. Okay? So now in here we don't have anything right now. So the only thing we need to modify, right, is here is our script source, right, main, and deferred. That's all we need right now. And actually in here, let's just go ahead and in the title, let's type week 2 carbon footprint. So carbon footprint, if you've never heard of it, is how much carbon based on the way you live. Again, try not, if your number's high, and it's relative to somebody else. In other words, we're all going to vary in our number. More than anything, it's just to get you thinking about how to code something like this, but also wouldn't hurt to actually think about our carbon footprints as well. Okay, so now we have the index file, we have the main.js file, we don't have anything in them, which is fine. We have the terminal open down here, so I'm going to go ahead and do git add star, git commit -m, right? And actually I gave you for the setup is done, setup done. Good, so I now know your setup is done, and I'm going to go ahead and do git push. Okay? So right now, and that's why I wanted to actually do it the way I had, is in your public, right? What you now should see is this week 2. And what we're going to end up doing, right? Right now, if you were to, once you do reply and you've done your code and you want to just look at how other people's doing their code, and that's actually something I'd highly recommend once you have your code done, because looking at how other people approach their code is really important. but just looking at their code before you approach it is not. And I know that can seem kind of weird when you first learn about it, but but going back to this concept, in order for you to see it, of course, you'd have to come in here and look at their JavaScript, right? What's more fun and what's more realistic is we actually render this, and we're going to do this on your public as a website. Okay, so let me show you how to do this. So it doesn't matter what directory folder you're in. Once you have your public open, right, so we could have it just open here, you go into settings, okay? And actually, I've already done this on mine, so I actually need to do this on, on another repo that I set up, because I did it on mine just to make sure, because this is actually the first time I've actually done this setup, so this is good to know. So again, you're going to use your public one, don't worry about that part of it, right? So you go into settings, and under settings you have all these options. You go all the way down under code and automation, you go to pages. And now under pages, what we're going to do here is we're actually going to, and if you don't know about GitHub pages, if you're taking my 82 or even my 85, you will learn about this, because we're basically saying take this repo and make it a website. Because right now when we're looking at these output of the code, we're looking at it just from the code perspective, but we want to see it from the way most people see it, which is it's through web pages, rendering a web page, like we're doing locally when we're running the live server. But we can do this from the web perspective, which is awesome. So what we're going to do here, and if you want to know about GitHub pages, check that out. We're going to build and deploy, and actually in this case we're just going to leave that as classic GitHub pages. And then we're going to say GitHub pages is currently disabled. So what we want to do here is say what branch. Now we're all for this course going to be, unless I change something, using the main branch. So you click here, and then here you actually can just leave it as the root, and I'll show you what that means in a minute. Okay, so again, on branch, select main, leave this as it is, and hit save. And when you hit save, this is actually what creates the GitHub pages. Now it'll say, okay, I have GitHub pages, the source has changed. It'll add something like Jekyll thing, which, by the way, not a bad thing to do once you learn more about what Jekyll is. We don't need to do it for this course, right? But what will happen is it'll take just a few minutes, right? It'll take just a few minutes. And once you have that, let me just refresh, so in case I have it coming in, I'm going to go back to settings. If you don't see this, just go back and check it after a little while. It'll be in there. Matter of fact, I'll go show you the one that I already did over to show you. But let's just refresh this page. Give it a second. It's got to actually do some what we call DNS building. So that's the process of doing it. So let me show you in mine, and to show you how to get it. So once you've done this in your public, I'll show you how mine works. I've done it under pages. Good, you should get this message like this. Okay, so it was deployed, and now I have a live site. So when I click on this, and you can say visit, or just, because this is the URL you'll end up when you finish this work. So let's go in here, right? Cool. And there's really nothing in here right now. I think I don't even have, matter of fact, and this is key, is we're going to actually have it add W2 to that URL, so that this would then, when somebody clicks on your link, let me just go back and show you. By default, it was just serving, and let's just look at what that means. Out of my public, there was only a README file, right? If I was to do W1 here, that would be the week 1 things, are code and HTML that we wrote. And so we're going to end up, when you finish here, we haven't written anything yet, but we'll have this be the URL that you will share with the class. Okay. By the way, I coded this first. That was my carbon footprint. Now, what I'm going to do now, hopefully you got that, right? So come back here. So now we have this part done. I'll add the content about updating your repo. So now what I want you to do is, I have a link here. And what you're going to do is you're going to write JavaScript statements to declare variables. I got to fix that for each category on the link above. And I'll walk you through kind of the concept, and then I want you to code this. And then when you're done, right, When you're done, put coding is done. But what you'll end up sharing, unlike the assignments from before, you'll end up sharing that URL here. Okay? So in the discussion, you'll end up sharing, right, a URL that looks like this. This would be your public, and this would be your two, right? And then when you hit enter, that creates a link, so when somebody else comes in here, they can see it. And then in the writing, right, share your thoughts on this work, right? And then also, and I'm going to add this, right, once you've written a code, it is okay, I'm going to say this again, to look at other people's code, but not until you've written your own, right? And then 2 replies for full points. And really those replies, I think what I'm going to do is have you focus on somebody else's code on those replies. Okay, so now let's actually walk through how to do this. So this first one, right, how to calculate your carbon footprint is the first one. And part of this work is I want you to come up with your own variable names. This is part of how, we kind of see and how you've thought about variables. We talked about camel case. We've talked about making them more clear, just somebody reading them what they are, right? So the first category in here, let's go back. I was already going through it. That's why I was at the bottom. First one is a number of members of your household. Okay, so you'd go through, read the requirements, and then you don't have to, we're only coding the number based on you understanding what it's asking for. If you live alone, then your carbon footprint is likely higher than someone who lives in a house or an apartment, right? So you'll end up giving yourself a score. You'll do that, again, name your variables, assign it a value, right? Number 2, name your variables to give it a value. So you'll go through all of these, right? And at the end, you'll add them up. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you kind of just the concept of how to add, and then I want you to go through, come up with your variables and add them, and then display, and I'll show you how to actually create, because we've actually already done this where we've updated output already. Okay, all right, so in here, back to my code on my W2, meaning my W2 folder, I have my JS. Now, I'm not going to write the code for you, but if I was to approach this code, right, I'd probably use const, unless there's a reason you want to use let, and maybe you would have that. But for me, I would say, now, this is not variable 1, right? Or I could say example 1. But in your case, when you're doing this, when you want to do something related to what your value is, right? I'm not going to tell you that. That's part of your assignment, is to figure out what you would call it, right? Count the number of members of your household. You come up with what your variable names, making sure you're using camel case, right? So if I said that was whatever, right? And then an example. Now again, I'm only doing this to show you just setting up variables, right? And we'll say 10. Right? Yada, 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 right? Do all 8. Okay. So then what you'd want to do is when you get to the very end, after you finish them all, then all you have to do is add them up. Tally them up. This is transportation is the last one. That is add up your score, right? After you calculate, add them together. If your score is less than 60, mine was, what was it? Right at 60. It feels pretty good. Right? If it's higher, yeah, there's definitely the one area I saw was, the one area I got most dinged on was the number of electronics I buy. Whew. But it's okay, we're all going to be different. That's okay. All right, so now what you'd want to do is you'd say const, right? And you could, again, name this whatever you want. Name it something that represents what it is. That's what I will look for, right? I am, for this example, just going to say total. I'm going to say example 1, which is the variable that I declared, right? Value of 1 plus, and actually this probably would be better, value. Example is bad name. Even value is not that good, right? And I could even say my value and make it camel case, right? My value would be better because I'm going to, right? So I'm going to say here, because I'm going to end up changing them because I didn't like this. And I kind of did these on the fly, so that makes sense, right? Value 2, right? Again, you're going to have 8 of these, and so this line will end up really long, All right. So here's your other challenge. We have already seen in the week 1 how to use JavaScript code to output something to the page or update something on the page. All right. So this is part of your challenge. Is I want you to do that to where you end up, and again, you've already written the code, I'm pointing to it. All right, go and see if you remember how we did it, and then you figure out, right, how to do it. Now in my example, right, and I'll show you, if I hit inspect, I can actually see I did a H1 here. Now this value is not actually typed in the HTML. This I updated with JavaScript code, and that'll be an important part of what you do, right? Is making sure this, and again, you don't have to use like I did, do something else. I just showed you a very simple example here. Okay, so when you got that done, share your URL like I did here, right? Share your thoughts on this work, and then the replies, and I will update this, is actually once you've written your code, right? Don't do it until then you can, when you hit reply, you'll see other people's posts. Now you might be the first person in here, and I used to give actual if you did work 2 days early, I think I'll start that next week. If you post 2 days before the due date, right, I actually don't make you do replies, which is my incentive to try to get you to work ahead so people have work to look at, right? I actually could do that here. If you post 2 days before the due date, in this case due date, right? You check the current schedule, right? This is, so 2, it'd be the morning before, 2 mornings before, right? So back that up, 15th in the morning. I'm not going to put that in here, and that's a benefit of you watching the content. Okay, all right, hit post. Again, you won't see the replies. I hope this was fun. Again, this was not meant as a shaming in any way, but it's just good for all of us to know. And you've learned some important things in this one. You've learned how to modify your public repo for the class for it to be a website versus just looking at the code. You've gone through, created variables. This is just basically an exercise in creating good variable names. That's part of how I'll grade this, right? And then making sure your code does work. If you in order to get all the points you have to do, you have to have working code, right? Remember, we've learned how to in the browser actually go in and see if there's any error messages, right, on our code. Now I haven't written any code here, have I? Am I week 2? I actually did write some code. Oh, this is a really good point. I'm glad I did this. I wouldn't see it out here until I'd actually push the code. So that's the difference between rendering your code. Remember, and if you post, and I'm glad I saw this, if you post a URL that looks like this, none of us will be able to see it. Only you will be able to see this. The URL that you need to post that we can all see will look like this. So when you're troubleshooting your code and you're running live server, that's great. This is where you would look. But don't give us this URL thinking this is the URL we can all see. We will not be able to see it. Okay? Just to be clear, I'm glad I hit that before I stopped. All right. Hope you have fun with this. Talk to you later.